What is up, Packers fans? Welcome into our weekly members-only Q&A with a little bit of a catch today. Today is still the members Q&A. I did want to keep that. I didn't want to sort of screw our members over in any way, but obviously we have a massive, massive news story today. And maybe even I screwed it up because it looks like maybe because everyone is allowed in. So everyone's allowed in. Everyone's allowed to be here. I'm making it open to everyone, but only members are going to be able to ask questions throughout the course of this show. So not, again, our normal policy or procedure or anything like that. If you're new here, welcome. This was, again, supposed to be for members only, but because we are going to talk a lot of Jaire Alexander, I did want to open it up. But if you want to actually ask questions today, you will, in fact, need to sign up to be a member. Again, that is not standard protocol, but just for today only because we already had it scheduled. All right. With that being said, I just want to start off by saying I was effing right. I told you guys. No, I'm just kidding. I did not know this in its entirety all the way along in any way, shape, or form. Certainly wavered on it quite a bit over the course of the last month. This was something that when you look at it in its entirety, when you've been looking at roster decisions and how Goody operates and how the Packers talk about certain players, and just, again, what I've said all the way along, reading between the lines, reading the tea leaves, whatever you want to call it, understanding Goody and Goodyisms and understanding like the things that he says and doesn't say, I felt legitimately 99.99% sure, before the draft, into the draft, immediately after the draft, that this was going to be the ultimate decision. That was until Rob Demovsky reported, hey, anything's on the table. And then Matt Schneidman reported, hey, the Packers are offering Jaire a potential restructured contract. Well, then that certainly changes the calculus quite a bit. But why I felt this way from the beginning and why I think that Green Bay ultimately came to this conclusion is, again, pretty simple. We've talked about it all offseason long. What you are in the business of doing as an NFL general manager is basically making investments. You are investing a first-round pick in a player. You are investing a $17.5 million contract in a player. You are investing all of these sort of assets that you hold into different players with the hopes that you are going to get the return on that investment. And Jaire Alexander's future and his forecast is about as murky and as muddy as you could possibly have a forecast be. You have no idea, and I mean zero idea whatsoever, what the future of Jaire Alexander is going to look like. So investing $17.5 million in cold, hard, cash this upcoming season, which is what they would be paying him. And yes, that full $17.5 million is going to be savable on the salary cap, both this year and next year. Anything that they save this year will carry over into next year, helping you pay for guys like Zach Tom or Rasheed Walker or Sean Ryan or Quay Walker or Romeo Doubs or future free agents or Christian Watson or whoever they want. You will have that ability to use that money both now if you want to, but also in the future. But point being is they have $17.5 million in cash that you had to decide, do you want to invest in the 2025 version of Jaire Alexander? And that is a very risky bet, no matter what way that you want to look at it. $17.5 million for a player that has played half of the games over a 4-year period of time is very murky, and even a lower percentage of games over the last 2 years and over last year, no matter what way you want to cut it. This isn't like cherry picking a group of games. Look at it over a season, 2 seasons, 3 seasons, 4 seasons. He just has not played in the prime of his career. From the day that basically he signed that contract extension up and even before that, right? Going back to the shoulder injury, up until now, he just has not been able to stay healthy at all. I don't blame Jaire Alexander for that. I don't really have a take one way or the other if Jaire should have played through more or if the Packers tried to push him too hard. I don't have that access to the information and certainly don't have a medical degree to make that determination one way or the other. But he was not able to stay healthy at ages, again, 24, 25, 26, and 27. What does that look like at age 28 as he's older? It's usually not getting better from an injury standpoint. And if you're going to put $17.5 million into that, you better hope that you're going to get 13, 14 games. If you told Goody right now, you're going to get a full, helping of Jaire Alexander, 16 games, 15 games, 14 games even, I bet he would say, all right, I'm cool with 17.5 million for that. Sign me up. I can accept that. But the algorithm would pump out and say, your expected return on investment for Jaire Alexander is 8.5 games or fewer. And if you're going to invest $17.5 million into that from a monetary standpoint, you better get more than that. And you just don't know. If you are of the belief that the Packers made an unbelievable decision on this, that they're going to be geniuses for making this decision, just know that by releasing him and him signing with another team, if he goes out and plays 5 or 6 games or less or just doesn't play well, doesn't play like himself, yes, you and Brian Gutekunst will look like a genius. If they release Jaire Alexander, which of course they're doing, and you love that decision, and he goes out, signs with a NFC or division rival, goes out and plays 17 games plus playoffs as an all-pro season, you and Goody are going to look like a complete idiot. If they would have done the opposite, if they would have kept him and he would have stayed and they would have paid him 17.5 million and he would have played the entirety of the season and played like an all-pro player, Goody and you would have looked like a genius if that's what you wanted to do. And vice versa, if they would have kept him and he would have played his normal 8 games or fewer and not been available in the big games or during the playoffs or just not played up to the same standard, you and Brian Gutekunst, if that's what, again, you wanted to do, would have looked like a complete idiot. This is not an evaluation of Jaire Alexander, the player. This is just trying to figure out and understand, is 17.5 million worth it for this particular player, knowing what you know over the past 4 seasons? There's zero way to predict that. You cannot know. You do not know. The evaluation of Jaire Alexander as a player is still one of the better cover corners in this league. And if you knew he was going to be healthy, still well worth the 17.5 million. Look at the corners who signed deals in the free agency period this offseason. Some players who got paid right around that 17 million cannot play to the level that Jaire Alexander is capable of playing at. But add on the top of the high price point with unknown injury issues and just knowing if he's going to be able to play in games or not, with on top of it some locker room angst, frustration, suspension, etc., it just ends up in this whole matzo ball of, oh my goodness, they're probably not going to keep him. And then when you add on top of that the fact that you could not find a trade partner and no other team wanted to take on that $17.5 million contract, which multiple reports of that Green Bay had a deal in place, but they wanted to restructure Jaire Alexander, but he was unwilling to do so. Add on top of that Jaire had no incentive into taking Green Bay's deal, other than the fact that per Matt Schneidman's report, it sounded like he wanted to be in Green Bay. Other than that report, and if that is true, that would be the only thing. Other than that, there's no incentive. Would you rather, if you were Jaire and his agent, negotiate with one team, or would you rather negotiate with 31 teams? You would always rather negotiate with 31 teams. So this makes it this incredibly complex situation where we are not evaluating Jaire Alexander, the player, the talent, the cover corner. You're not necessarily looking at the depth or the roster or anything like that. You save the money, you're able to carry that over into future years. This is simply an evaluation as to whether or not you could get the return on investment on 17.5 million. And without knowing that, Goody, I believe rightfully so, without, again, knowing the future, just knowing what we know right now, bet wisely on that he would not get that ROI. And that's how we get to the decision that we get to today. Now, there's obviously a lot more just in general that goes into that. How does that affect the Packers moving forward? I still believe that if you look at last year, Jaire played a little over 300 snaps. Some of those were awful snaps against Philadelphia in that opener against A.J. Brown and company. But the rest of the season, he looked good. He played unbelievable in that Titans game. You are going to lose about 300 of those snaps. And that is, I guess, going to sting in some real way because he was mostly good in those 300 snaps. But you are also replacing what was your primary corner as a starter throughout the course of the year in Eric Stokes, who was the lowest graded player on the team, at least as I viewed it this past year. And you were replacing that with Nate Hobbs. That should be a significant upgrade. If you take the 900 snaps that Stokes and Jaire played together, combine them, and assuming that Hobbs can stay healthy, which, by the way, has been an issue for him as well, But if he can stay healthy and play the 900 plus snaps this year, you will be better off in those 900 snaps in totality, I believe, with Nate Hobbs than the 900 that you got from Stokes and Jaire combined this past year. There's no guarantee, though, that Hobbs can stay healthy. And while I do believe that right now you feel pretty good about Keyshawn, who found his home on the outside, played much better on the outside than he ever did in the slot a season ago, with Nate Hobbs, with Javon Bullard, with Carrington Valentine, I feel like you feel comfortable with those four. I feel like you've got a great safety group behind those that makes it better. And hopefully this year, the pass rush will be better. New defensive line coach and a healthy LVN and a healthy Kenny Clark with a returning Devontae Wyatt and returning Rashawn Gary. There are reasons to believe that that could be better in its entirety and in its totality. But where I do think there is fair concern is number one with depth. You have three real corners. Take Javon Bullard away, move him back to safety. He's a true safety that can play a little bit in the slot, or maybe even a little bit more than that in the slot. But you have three true corners that you can trust and have some faith in. And Nate Hobbs, Carrington Valentine, and in Keyshawn Nixon. After that, your next three are completely unproven in Kamal Haddon, Kalen King, and Micah Robinson, and or anyone else that you want to put in that equation right now. If you have real legitimate concerns about the depth of the corner room, I hear you, I understand you, and I agree with you. I have some concerns about that as well, even though I do feel like Kamal Haddon might be a little bit of a diamond in the rough. Fingers crossed. Great compliment from Keyshawn Nixon on Kamal Haddon this past week, saying he's been outstanding so far this offseason. That's a good sign, but it's still a very unproven group. And you are an injury away from being extremely limited at what you can do at corner. So that's a piece of this. The other piece that you also have to be cognizant of is, what if Jaire does go to Minnesota or Philadelphia or San Francisco or Detroit? Are you still okay with that? I think that's part of the reason Green Bay wanted to hold off on this as long as they could, to see if not only they could get something in return for Jaire, but they could have a little bit more control over where Jaire goes. If he goes to Baltimore to play with Lamar Jackson, his buddy from Louisville, it's not a big deal. It's no harm, no foul. If he goes to one of those big time competitors, either in the NFC North or in the NFC, it stings a whole heck of a lot more. And that has to be taken as part of the equation as well. And again, now he can go anywhere, at least where there is interest for his services. That adds to this as well. But what you are deciding, if you're the Green Bay Packers, you are deciding what you believe is right for your franchise and whether or not Jaire Alexander should be on your team or not. After that, if you are saying that, hey, the value isn't there for giving a big contract for Jaire Alexander, if that's the determination and decision that you are making, then you shouldn't be too upset if another team in the conference or division or a competitor is willing to give him that contract, because you inherently feel that giving a big contract for Jaire Alexander is a mistake as a franchise. So you should be applauding that some other team that is a competitor of yours is willing to make that mistake. The caveat to that, of course, is that if they get him for much cheaper, if Jaire gives a discounted version to some team to go play with an enemy of the Packers and they end up getting him for like a 1 year, $5 million deal or something, well, that's a whole different situation altogether. So that will be a key piece of this as well. And then again, Jaire could go out and play 17 games and have an all-pro season. He's capable of it. He's talented enough. He just hasn't shown that. So regardless of what you feel about Brian Gutekunst, the decision, Jaire Alexander, where things go from here, I think the ultimate answer here is it's impossible to know as of today on June 9th if this was the right decision or if this was the wrong decision. And part of that has to be considered into the equation as well. You just can't tell. So you have to try to be as predictive as possible. And while past results do not always predict future behavior and future results, knowing that Jaire has not been quite the same player since the shoulder injury, that there has been some frustration and animosity between both sides, that there has been a suspension, and that he has missed half of the games over the last 4 years, you put that all into one equation and say, should we keep Jaire Alexander at $17.5 million? And again, I think any algorithm or AI would say, hey, yeah, probably not the best way to invest your money. And I can understand from a fan standpoint of like, screw analytics, screw algorithms, screw everything. I want Jaire on this team. The team is better with Jaire. And if he plays, absolutely. But again, that's the very hard part of this decision, is how much do you want to pay for the potential upside of that? Is there a better way to spend that money this season? Probably not, unless you're going to invest it into a contract extension for Tom as of now and kind of utilize the money that way. But It's difficult for the team to be better without Jaire, but you just have to almost take it as if you didn't have him already, or you only had him for 4 games or 6 games or 8 games or whatever that amount of games was going to be. And that's how you sort of had to view it, at least through that lens. Other than that, again, you have every right to feel as excited or disappointed as you want as a fan. If you thought this was the right move, you can make a very strong argument for it. If you felt like it was the wrong move, go listen to the show I did for the, reasons to keep Jaire Alexander. I did a whole basically like devil's advocate of like, here's why Green Bay should keep him. And there is plenty of reasons as you go through that you could have made an argument for keeping him as well. For me, if I were the GM, you can thank me again that I'm not. You can thank the Packers that I'm not. I would have made this exact same decision. I would have made the exact same decision based on the contract that was made, that was there. I just don't think you can trust it. I don't think he's been consistent enough. And I don't think that you feel great about spending that amount of money. Now, how you can pivot, I don't know if there is a pivot here. I don't necessarily expect a Jalen Ramsey situation. I don't think Asante Samuel Jr. is the answer. I don't think Rasul Douglas is the answer. They might just go as is for now and see how this goes at the start of camp. Maybe they bring in some sort of veteran right before the start of camp. That's a possibility as well. They do now have 2 open roster spots, with 1 spot already open, and then the second being the Jaire Alexander release. So we'll see if they do add anything either at corner or just in general. But again, the big news today, Jaire Alexander will be released, no longer a Green Bay Packer. And now the drama becomes, where does he go? And, does Green Bay do anything to replace him on the roster in any real way? All right, we'll get to as many questions as we can. I've got about 45 minutes here, I believe. I believe I'm set to still go on with Marcus Eversole at 2:35 today, although I have not seen a confirmation on that as of yet. Let's get into as many questions as we can. Fatal Massacre, thank you so much for becoming an all-new member. Appreciate that a ton. Aiden, how can we get in contact with you about business? Packaday@gmail.com. So PACKADAYPODCAST@gmail.com. Ryan, Goody has regressed in player evaluation in the last few years. With the new team president taking over next month, is Goody on the hot seat? Absolutely not. And I disagree with the assessment that he has been regressing in player evaluation. Player evaluation is a complex topic in its entirety, meaning that there's a lot that goes into that. If you want to make the argument, and I could certainly hear the argument and have made the argument myself, that the Packers' first round drafting in player evaluation has not been good enough when it comes to, as of right now, not saying Jordan Morgan, LVN, and some of these players can't take a big jump, but the ROI that they've received so far in Morgan, Van Ness, Quay Walker, Devontae Wyatt, and Eric Stokes has not been good enough with 5 first-round picks prior to Matthew Golden this past year, and we don't know what Matthew Golden's going to be. I will certainly hear that argument, and I think it comes across loud and clear. If you want to look at the ability to find really important free agents, I feel awesome about finding Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney, signing them to those 2 deals that they were able to get them on. Played as arguably the top 2 players on the team this past year. That's pretty good player evaluation. If you want to talk about finding diamonds in the rough in free agency, or even what maybe we can see out of Aaron Banks and Nate Hobbs this season, obviously remains to be seen, but I think those are still really solid additions to this roster as well. And they've been able to find good players like Chris Brooks just chilling on the open market as a street free agent. That's a pretty darn good pickup. They've shown that they can acquire players in a variety of different ways. How about Malik Willis? I would say Malik Willis is a pretty damn good evaluation for a late 7th round pick that basically saved the Packers season this past year. That's pretty good evaluation. How about middle to late round picks? Edgerrin Cooper in the 2nd round last year. I'd say that's pretty damn good evaluation. Evan Williams in the 4th round. That's pretty damn good evaluation. Jaden Reed in the 2nd, Tucker Kraft in the 3rd, even guys like Dontavian Wicks in the 5th, Carrington Valentine in the 7th. Those are pretty good evaluations. How about Zach Tom and Romeo Dobbs in a single 4th round? That seems pretty good. Rasheed Walker in the 7th round, Sean Ryan in the 3rd round. Yes, there are aspects of Goody that I'm sure can get better. I definitely disagree from a standpoint of like, if you think that this is a bad evaluation from Jaire Alexander or from Goody on Jaire Alexander, definitely disagree with that. Like I said, I would have done the exact same thing. It's not to say that it ends up being the right choice, but given the information that we know right now, at minimum, I can absolutely understand it. And like I said, would have done the same thing myself. And then, yeah, could you have hoped for maybe some better ROI in the 1st round picks? Absolutely. But there are a lot of other really great mid-round picks throughout that time, free agent signings, and this roster is still in a very good spot and a competitive team for the time being. So no, he is not even remotely on the hot seat as we speak. And I, again, totally disagree with the assessment that he has regressed in player evaluation. In fact, I think that there are things that he's actually gotten better at over the course of the past 3 to 4 years in some of his talent evaluation, where if you look at it actually earlier, I mean, some of his tougher drafts came actually earlier in the process. You know, you look at, the 2021 draft, right? The 2021 draft was a unmitigated nightmare. We have not seen anything like that since, and his last handful or last 4 drafts have been much better than anything we saw at that point in time. Even 2020, like you can look at 2020 and 2021 combined and just say Jordan Love was really the only player that they got out of those entire 2 groups that's of any real value. In 2021, you have only Isaiah McDuffie remaining. In 2020, you only have Jordan Love remaining. So you've got 2 players from those draft classes. Again, one of them being Isaiah McDuffie. That was, again, 2020, 2021. I believe 2022 through 2025 have been much better drafts than that. So again, I would disagree pretty vehemently that it's gotten worse. In fact, I think you can make a pretty strong argument that it's actually gotten a lot better. Spike Mocha, thank you so much for the new membership. Appreciate that a ton. Wesley, I feel like the cornerback room has been good without Jaire. Certainly was capable of being still a top 8 to top 10 defense this past year. I think similarly to what we had the conversation of on the defensive line of like, hey, if you actually look at the defensive line, it's not as bad as you would expect. They're top 8 in sacks, 16th in pressure percentage. They only blitz the second fewest amount of any teams in the NFL. Like there's some things that you can point to and say, hey, it's actually not as bad as it looks. And then you look at it closer and say, actually, they made pretty much all of their living from a pressure and sack standpoint against the Titans, the Seahawks, and the Dolphins this past year. Those 3 games were so much of their production, like a huge chunk of it. So you have to look at these things. I think you can make an argument that the secondary in its totality and that the way that they were able to play and Jeff Hafley was able to get out of those players was much better than what the consensus is right now. And I think adding Nate Hobbs over Eric Stokes is going to make it a much improved secondary in and of itself. Eric Stokes was, to me, bar none, the lowest graded player on the team last year and was still really struggling at corner in 2024. If Nate Hobbs is even just solid, like average, good, anything in that range, not even great, just solid player, that is a pretty significant upgrade over where Eric Stokes was this past year. And I think that can make it better. If their pass rush is better, that will help as well. But what I will say is when you are going against teams like the Minnesota Vikings and Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison are out there and some of these other teams, right, that have really good wide receivers and you need a really good secondary in big games, I do think it's fair to say, does this team have the top level corner play when you really need it? That is a fair question to ask. What I will say is I think we're starting to see teams invest less in corners. And the reason that is you are seeing a ton of zone defense in the NFL right now. You're playing a spot rather than a player. And I think wholeheartedly that is actually a pretty wise assessment. I think safeties are more and more important because of the ability to need to come up and play multiple spots, plus stop the run from depth and get to like all levels of the field and disguise things incredibly well. Where your linebackers are, again, the offenses are doing everything in their power to confuse the hell specifically out of those linebackers. And you have to be able to do everything at linebacker from take on blocks from 300 plus pounders to chase down the fastest running backs and receivers in the league. It's a really tough skill set to have. And then your pressure, of course, is just paramount. But your corners, when I'm going through it, like try it sometime, sincerely. Go through and grade, just try. It doesn't even matter what your criteria is. Go and just watch corners play and watch the difference between a man play and a zone play. It is really difficult to grade a zone play for the corner on the vast majority of plays because so much of the time they're just in a spot. Now, there's nuance within that of where are they supposed to be, what depth are they supposed to get to, and things like that. But those are very difficult things to grade without knowing exactly how they're coached, how they're supposed to hand off assignments and things like that. Instead of being a unbelievable man-to-man corner who has to be able to, stick with a wide receiver through the entirety of a route, you're less graded on your pure coverage ability as much as you are graded on your ability to pass off assignments, communicate, be very smart, and more specifically, rally and tackle. And if you don't believe me, That's fine. Go back to what Mike Zimmer said about zone corners. I think he was specifically talking about cover two, but you can still apply this. He's like, if we're playing cover two and I'm playing my corners in zone, I can go find a good zone corner down at the local Quick Trip, or he did say Quick Trip, but he said the local gas station or mini mart or whatever he said. Like, you can find those guys that can play that specific role. And I'm not saying that Nixon and Hobbs or whatever, like, you can just plug in Micah Robinson, Kalen King, and Kamal Haddon here and everything's going to be great. But I do think you are getting to a point where you're playing spots a lot more than you're playing the wide receiver in front of you. And you still need ball skills. You still need to be able to rally and tackle, but it's a different skill set that you're looking for. I could even go further than that and make an argument that the pure, like, what is Jaire best at? Like, pure man-to-man cover skills, right? His ability to mirror wide receivers, stick with them, and make it very pesky. He's not even going to be asked to do that much. Like, not in this defense. I do think it gives you a different wrinkle, a different skill set that you don't have on the team. And I think Jeff Hafley would find a way to utilize that. But if they're going to continue to play the brand of defense that they did this past year with a ton of zone defense, you're probably paying a premium for Jaire Alexander to play a spot when you can actually have players who can play that spot as well and actually rally and tackle much better than what Jaire Alexander does. That's oversimplifying it to some extent, but we are starting to see teams look at, like, first round corners. You just don't see, like, the guys going as early. You don't see as many of them. Teams are starting to value that top tier corner less and less because of the amount of zone defense. And the ones that are usually pretty darn good in zone and can rally and tackle and give you a variety of different skills. Again, oversimplified a bit, but I can understand why that's the case. And again, I think Green Bay, with what they're being asked to do, can absolutely work with Carrington Valentine, although you would like to see him clean up his tackling a little bit. Keyshawn Nixon, Nate Hobbs, Javon Bullard. We'll see if any of those other guys can step up. Jason, thank you so much for becoming an all-new member as well. Appreciate that. You guys are awesome. Let's get to some of these questions that came in earlier. Excuse me. I got about, again, 35 minutes left here. All right, how much do you think, if any, the wide receiver group regression last year was contributed by losing, by being coached by first-timer in Mahaffey? I know Vrabel is still there, but I feel Mahaffey's name has not been questioned. I do feel like Mahaffey's name has come up a decent amount, actually, when it comes to this. This is one of those things, John, where it's impossible to know. At least it's impossible for me to know. Matt LaFleur probably can know a little bit more about it, and we can certainly make a hypothesis about it. But as I joke about all the time, we do not have all 22 of these coaches and how they're coaching the individual players, right? I do believe that, like you said, with Jason Vrabel still being there, with obviously a lot of the same coaching staff, same offensive coordinator, same coach, like all of that stuff. I don't know how much it probably mattered, but if it were me and I were Matt LaFleur, I would certainly be looking into it and say, like, hey, why did this happen? Why did so many of the receivers regress? And I think from the outside, that's really the only thing that we can go off of, right? For me, if I want to evaluate an assistant coach, again, without being there, without being able to actually see how they're coaching day to day, the only thing I can go off of is, what were the level of expectations for that room going into the season? And then, did they exceed it? Did they meet it? Or were they well below it, or just below it in some way? And clearly, for the wide receivers this past year, they were well below expectations on the whole. And I would say nobody overachieved. And there was very few, if any, that actually hit the level of expectations that I think a lot of people had for them going into the year. And that certainly is going to reflect negatively on Mahaffey in some real way. Whether or not that's fair, that's a tougher thing to say from the outside looking in. But it absolutely is noticeable. And if it continues to happen, I would think that there would potentially be a thought of a change there at some point. But again, it's nearly impossible to judge from the outside looking in without knowing it, all the scenarios and situations and how he's coaching that group from the inside. Now that the John news is out, going to be very hard to win a Super Bowl with Nixon as your number one corner. The trickle down of playing Hobbs outside instead of slot is a negative as well. Green Bay has one injury to the cornerback from disaster. Very risky for a team with Super Bowl aspirations. All right, there's a lot of stuff that I want to go over here, and a decent amount that I disagree with, and some of it we talked about already. But again, I think some of it is also very fair, and I can understand the frustration in general. Okay, so the first part that I want to hit here is the playing Hobbs on the outside instead of in the slot. I've said this all offseason. I still very much believe this to be the case. On early downs, as of now, I expect it to be Hobbs and Nixon on the outside in base defense, Hobbs and Nixon on the outside with Javon Bullard in the slot in your more heavy nickel, big nickel, whatever you want to call it. If you want to go nickel against a 12 personnel package or whatever the case may be, if you're going a little bit bigger, Bullard in the slot with Hobbs and Nixon on the outside. And I think Nate Hobbs is more than capable of playing that role on the outside for Green Bay. I don't have any concern about that. But here's the thing. For anyone that thinks, and again, we'll see how this plays out, but I would still very much believe that once you are in season and you get into obvious passing downs or more 11 personnel nickel, your passing nickel, your smaller nickel, whatever you want to call it, I wholeheartedly expect it to be Carrington Valentine and Keyshawn Nixon on the outside with Nate Hobbs in the slot. I think you are still going to see plenty of Hobbs in the slot, and on obvious passing downs, that's where he's going to be. And I think that's more than fine. I think Carrington Valentine is more than capable of playing in obvious passing downs on the outside. So is Nixon, and so is Hobbs in the slot. And I feel really good about that group overall, or at least good enough. So I don't think that this is a death blow to wanting to see Nate Hobbs in the slot. And I still believe in normal nickel and in more obvious passing downs, you are going to see him in the slot. So I don't think that dream is dead. The next thing I want to say here is, while there's not necessarily a corner on the market that is, really enticing to me or reaching out to me in any real way, it is noteworthy that we are 90 days away from the first game of the regular season. The Packers have found ways to find corners in the past that you would not expect to be able to come in and play at any real level. Keyshawn Nixon was a 1-year vet minimum, $0 guaranteed signing. Rasul Douglas was a pickup from a practice squad in the season. And then he went out and played unbelievable the remainder of that year. All right. Corey Ballantyne is not somebody that you were expecting to get starting reps out of, yet he was out there starting in wins against Kansas City and the Chargers and the Lions on Thanksgiving Day a couple of years ago. This has been a team that has been able to find good corners almost anywhere, at least serviceable corners almost anywhere, and B has found ways to win games with those corners. So 90 days away from the season, they've been able to find these guys in the past, and maybe Kamal Haddon's one of those guys. Maybe Kalen King is one of those guys. Maybe Micah Robinson's one of those guys. Maybe they already exist on the roster. Maybe Green Bay feels better about that trio than we do on the outside looking in. That's possible as well. And again, the other thing too is last year, cut down time, backup quarterback looked like a nightmare situation. Pratt didn't look ready. Clifford didn't look good. And you're just like, what happens if Jordan goes down? And then they make a trade for Malik Willis for a future 7th round pick, and you get one of the best back quarterbacks in all of football. There is still plenty of time left. There are names out there that could make some sense. And while I do, again, we talked about it earlier, John, of what's can you hang against the Minnesotas of the world when you're playing those two big time wide receivers with the corners that you have? That will remain to be seen. But again, playing a lot of zone coverage, I do think changes the calculus a little bit, and it makes me a little bit less concerned about some of those matchups that normally in a man-to-man situation in the past would have got you into a lot bigger issues. So I think this group of defensive backs fits Jeff Hafley and the way that this defense played this past year. Would I still like a little bit more depth? Yes. Would I still like a little bit more competition? Absolutely. Let's see what he does over the course of the next 90 days or so. There's still plenty of time to add to that room if need be. And or maybe just Kamal Haddon, Kalen King, Micah Robinson, or a couple of those guys step up in some real way, and it becomes much less of an issue. And just, again, I'm not expecting this here, but it's so easy to immediately go doom and gloom. Oh, can't do it. It's not possible. They can't do it this way. The last time they won the Super Bowl, you were going into the season with a undrafted free agent corner as a starter on the outside, opposite Tramon Williams. And there was real concern as to whether or not you were going to be able to do that. And it was going to just be an unmitigated nightmare. And that undrafted free agent cornerback was Sam Shields. And he played lights out the remainder of the year. I don't know that Kamal Haddon or Kalen King or Micah Robinson or Gregory Jr. or any other corner on this team is going to be able to provide a Sam Shields level of cornerback play. If they can, sign me the hell up. But just know that there are these immediate feelings of, oh, they're screwed. You need a couple things to go your way if you are going to be a legitimate Super Bowl contender. whether it's they find a corner or whether maybe Nate Hobbs is way better than expected, Carrington Valentine takes a jump, whatever that thing is, yeah, they probably need something to hit right at corner. And maybe it doesn't. And maybe it just ends up not being good enough. Or maybe the corner room just ends up okay, but the linebackers, the defensive front, and the safeties play some of the best football that you could possibly imagine. And while the corners are still a little bit under par, everything else makes up for it. I don't know. But I would be, hesitant to say it's over, it's done with, especially as we sit here on June 9th. And they were a competitive team defensively this past year, even with Jaire Alexander out for a significant period of time. All right, Mike, happy Andy Monday. Happy Monday, Andy. Emergency Q&A because of Jaire. Love that you gave props to Kamal Haddon in today's show. Glad he's looking good and trending in the right direction. Jaire post June was inevitable. Let me just actually add right there. This to me had nothing to do with June 1. They could have post June 1 him at any time. They didn't need the money ahead of time. So the day of the first league year, they could have cut him with a post June 1st designation. So it now being past June 1st means absolutely nothing from a salary cap standpoint. They could have June 1st him at any time the entirety of the offseason. So just because it's past June 1, the only thing that would have mattered from a post June 1 standpoint was if he was traded. If it was a trade post June 1, that could have potentially made more sense where they maybe would have wanted to do it that way. Even then, they didn't need the money this year. So trading him pre-June 1 wouldn't have really affected anything either. So that part of it does not really play into the equation. But let's get to the rest of your comment here. Also, I'm not sure if you know this, but I was curious as to Justice's Packers story. Was in the PNW over the weekend for Goonies 40th anniversary and spent a few days in Seattle. Curious how he became a fan. Yeah, I'll have to touch base on that. If we have time today, I believe he's going to be coming on for tomorrow's show. So if I get the chance to ask him that, I will, Mike. And maybe sometime again when he's in one of our Q&As, you can ask him as well. But I forget exactly what the story is. I think he told it to me before, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. Sad to see Jaire go, though I completely understand why he couldn't be back on the contract. And I'm glad you brought this up, Go Pack. I am not excited to see Jaire Alexander go. I have said for a very long time now, the best case scenario out of all of this, the best is not looking up in your bank account and being like, oh, look at that. Got 17.5 extra million sitting in our bank account today. No, the best version of this situation was Jaire coming back and playing like an all-pro corner and, playing through the entirety of the season. That was the biggest upside of any play here. So if that would have happened, if he would have come back, I would have just been crossing my fingers and toes that he stayed healthy all year, or at least a significant amount of the year to make it worth the money. But that would have been the best case scenario. And I'll just say it one more time. There's just no way of knowing what odds of that happening are. And to gamble 17.5 million on it, I don't think would have been the wisest thing in the world. So, but I'm glad you brought that up. I don't think there's anyone that should be excited that Jaire is gone. I mean, that just seems unreasonable. I get that he is eccentric. I get that he is a unique character. I get that he has not been healthy. I get all of those things. I get that the contract wasn't worth it. Like I said, I would have done it myself, but he's been obviously a really good Packer when healthy. I still think he can be a really good player when healthy. And the best case version of this would have been that he was back and played at an all-pro level. That now is out of the equation. He is now gone, and now Green Bay has to pivot moving forward with how they want to utilize that money, and more importantly, how they can put together the best possible team the remainder of this offseason and going into the year. I still think Jenkins will be back. Again, that was another big piece of news today, is that Jenkins will be at minicamp, but he is not expected to practice as they continue to work from a contract standpoint on what they can do with Elton to make him happy. Out of the frying pan and into the fire, you resolve one contract dispute and another, of course, pops up a significant way. And it does not seem like this Elton Jenkins thing is going anywhere anytime fast. It's interesting that it came out that the Bills were the ones interested. Oh, I did not see that, Go Pack. Thank you for letting me know that. I'm not super surprised at that, to be honest. They could certainly use the depth. They have tried everything already this offseason to improve their defense. If you look at their primary free agent additions and draft picks, it's all defense. So it's not surprising to me that they're going to continue that goal, but that'd be a great place for him to end up. And he would be, I think, a really good addition to their secondary over there. Again, assuming he can stay healthy. Still bummed about Jaire. I get where Goody and Jaire are coming from, but he plays the game the right way. So much skill and swag, shutting down JJ in a must-win game, and then the gritty. That's cornerback one. Yeah, but if you look at his games, like he hasn't even played against Minnesota as of late. So again, that's where this just becomes very complicated. And I get your point here, John, if you're saying that exact same thing of like, you understand the decision, but like, even just going against Minnesota, like he didn't play against Minnesota either of the games last year. I think he played one game the year before that. Like his last 3 years, like he's never been out there even against the Vikings when you've needed him. And again, that ends up being the bigger problem than anything else. So that's been the issue again, is just getting him out there in those games where you need him the most. In the incredibly unlikely Packers-Steelers Super Bowl comes to fruition, can we do an ayahuasca happy hour? No. Nope. That is one thing I do not dabble in at all. And I'm not judging anybody. You go do you. Have fun. I have no judgment or anything on it whatsoever. I do not like foreign substances in my body at all. Just I can do alcohol, like, because I don't feel like there's a foreign substance in my body. But like anything else, I just do not feel right. I don't feel myself. I like feeling in control. And if I don't feel in control, I like freak out. So not for me, would not do well. I do not think at all. So no ayahuasca happy hour here on the Pack a Day podcast, and not with me hosting at least. It's probably frowned upon as well. Over under 11.5 games that Sex Panther is active for this season. For those of you who don't know, I made the joke that Savion Williams has Sex Panther hands. What is it? 60% of the time they work every time, or 80% of the time they work every time, whatever it is. So yeah, that's where this is coming from. I will say that he is active for over 11.5 games this year. And you've said a few times now that you think Green Bay could host a combine. How is that possible? All right. So let me be clear. I meant like combine or something like it. I'm not necessarily saying, I don't think Green Bay would be a great place to host the combine in February, to be clear, but just again, events is more of my point here. If they did want to host it in Green Bay, it would obviously not need to be at Lambeau Field. There's the Resch Center, the Crest Event Center. There is the Don Hudson Center. Like there are a variety of different fields that you could, put this on. You don't need a full football field for this thing. You could easily do that again. In the Resch Center would be more than capable of, doing something like that. So I'm not saying that's a great idea or anything like that. I'm just, my point at the time had more been like hosting events in Green Bay. I'm sure I said combine without even like thinking it through or whatever, but no, clearly it would not be at Lambeau Field itself, nor does it need to be. It's not like this completely super populated event. But again, just in general, Green Bay showed that it's capable of handling events in general. Still think that Ballantyne is the cornerback loss the Packers will feel the most. John, I love you. I do not believe that Corey Ballantyne will be the corner loss that they will feel the most. Even 300 snaps to Jaire will probably be felt more than Corey Ballantyne in totality. But I'll hear you out here. Ja didn't play, correct. Hobbs is a clear upgrade from Stokes, correct. But the depth in team's ability from corner 4 and 5 seems much more worrisome. Here will be my explanation on that, John, in general. Corey Ballantyne is a nice football player. There is just, you know what you're getting. There's a limited upside. He can play in a pinch and even hold his own. He can play on teams, but there's nothing dynamic. There's nothing special. There's nothing that he's going to be like a true starting corner in this league. When you sign him, you know that you're getting a number 5 corner, a good number 5 corner who can give you that ability to play corner in a pinch, and a solid special teams player. But when you get to that point, when you're a known commodity and you know you're not going to become a true starter or a real legitimate, difference maker on a team, usually your go-to as a general manager will be to say, let's try somebody else. I think I can get a number 5 corner out of Kalen King or Kamal Haddon or Micah Robinson. And in the meantime, maybe one of those shows me that they can actually be a starter down the road. So let me give reps an opportunity to those guys who I feel like can probably give me a replacement level Corey Ballantyne performance no matter what. And in the meantime, I might have a much higher upside where I can actually get something of value from one of those 3 where I already know what I'm getting out of Corey Ballantyne. Not necessarily disagreeing with you in the fact that, in knowing what we know right now, I probably would feel much better if Corey Ballantyne was on this depth chart, but I also wouldn't lose really any sleep over it. And I do think I'd probably just rather go with Robinson, King, or, any of those guys, Haddon, and see what they can go with and what they have rather than just running back Corey Ballantyne for another season. Does Kamal Haddon equal Sewell 2.0? Can the pro scouts find another gem at cutdowns? Possibilities. I do like Kamal Haddon. I liked what I saw on tape. I was stunned that the Kansas City Chiefs gave up on him as a 6th-round pick as quickly as they did with only like 30 preseason snaps a year ago. I do think there's some legit talent there. Go back and watch his year. What was it, a couple of years ago, where he was just absolutely shut down in college. If you haven't yet, go back and watch the episode I did on Kamal Haddon and Kalen King. And I think you'll feel better about the potential specifically with Kamal Hadden and what he can potentially bring to the table. I know that there's a lot of Kalen King support out there, but I actually think Kamal Hadden's the one that you should probably be keeping just a little bit more of a closer eye on. I'm going to miss Bro, but makes sense. We've been without him half the last 2 seasons, last 4 seasons, actually. Only plays in 14 games the last 2 years, and it clears up some cap space with no more of his antics. Hope our corners are good. It's a fair way of looking at it. All right, we went through those. Hoping this means we are closer to resolving a new contract for Zach Tom. Certainly possible, or at least certainly something that they should be looking at, that's for sure. Do you think we could trade for Trey Hendrickson since Jaire is gone? Could, yes. Will, no. I do not expect Trey Hendrickson to be a Green Bay Packer. I would be overjoyed and ecstatic if he was. I would definitely be for trying to trade for him. I do not expect that to be the case at all. I think they feel probably better about their defensive line than most people do. If they were going to add something, I almost wonder too if it would be defensive tackle rather than defensive end. But hey, if they want to do it, I think it'd be awesome. I just don't expect it to happen. Wonder if this changes anything with the Jenkins contract situation. Probably not. I think you still handle each of these things on their own accord. They do have some more money to spend now. We do know that much, but no, I think they're just going to have to work that out the same way that they would have previously. I don't think the Jaire situation really affects it in any real way. This is probably the right move for the future, but it doesn't get us closer to a championship this year. What I would argue, Jason, is I'm not sure it gets you further either. Again, without knowing what he can do or bring to the team. Considering we are in the window, I wish they could have worked out a deal to keep him. Don't disagree with that aspect of it. Again, I think the best case scenario would have been to try to keep him in some way and had he been healthy. But again, just without knowing that, it's really, really tough to do. And I just think you have to make those decisions on their own accord and then figure out how you're going to, upgrade or utilize that money or, kind of transition to something else. We know that they were willing to spend on him and bring him back in some real way. Now, can they pivot that money or those resources in another way to get another player for this roster that is a, real legitimate player that can maybe help them in 2025? Again, offseason's not over yet. Did most people still not expect this to happen? I guess I've been in the minority, assuming that this was still the 98% chance. Yeah, I did think it was more 50-50 as of late, most hated in Minnesota, and if I'm being real here, but you guys obviously know much earlier in the offseason how I felt about this, and this still felt like more likely conclusion between the two scenarios, but it definitely did feel a little bit more up in the air over the course of the last month or so. This was the move was content gold with the dead period looming. Most of the other creators have been running with this story like it's shocking. June 1 cut was always most likely outcome. Again, we talked about that. It's certainly been a main topic of conversation, though, and definitely something that has been taking up a lot of oxygen in the Packer space. Probably my one thing that I will be celebrating here in any way, shape, or form is not Jaire leaving, is not the 0.01% thing or anything like that. It's simply that we can hopefully now just move on from this conversation and don't have to talk about the Jaire thing anymore. And of course, it's going to be a topic today and tomorrow and maybe even this week. But, starting next week, the Jaire topic should finally die down in some real way. Andy, I 100% believe this would not happen, but I wanted to hear your opinion. Would Jalen Ramsey be a trade piece to think about after today? I definitely want to talk about this with Justice today. I do not think they will trade for him. If he does get released, I wouldn't be stunned if Green Bay sniffed around on it. One thing that you need to know about Ted and Goody is that when they feel like they can get a generational or sort of legendary player at a position, they take a look. Whether you want to go back to Julius Peppers, Charles Woodson, even Ron Wolf with Reggie White, obviously Zadarius Smith, not Zadarius Smith to a lesser extent, but I meant more Xavier McKinney, Josh Jacobs, Jimmy Graham is an example of this, even though it didn't work out. If they can get a big time known commodity, even at age 30, like Jimmy Graham was, like Julius Peppers was, like Charles Woodson was, like Reggie White was, even if it is in that age range, when there is a big time player that shows that they are just at a different breed of player than anyone else, which is why I thought Khalil Mack might be a real option if in fact he ever did hit the free agent market this year, which he didn't. I would think that they would at least have some internal conversations and maybe even talk to his agents and maybe even bring him in for a visit. Whether that means actually sign him, I tend to doubt it. I don't think that they would go in that direction, but he would fit great in Jeff Hafley's defense. I don't think he's the same player that he once was, to be totally clear, but I do still think he'd be a very fun fit within this defense. And I do think Green Bay would at minimum have some internal dialogue about it, and maybe even, again, bring him in for a visit or talk to his agent and see what the contract would potentially look like. So trade, no, and don't expect anything necessarily, period. But if you did tell me that they signed him to like a 1 year, $12 million deal or something like that, probably what they were willing to give Jaire Alexander this past year, yeah, I don't think it's the most far-fetched thing in the world, even though I would probably put it at about like a, I don't know, 3% chance of actually happening. Probably pretty slim, but I would not put it in the realm of impossibility. When a team guarantees a UDFA's or undrafted free agent salary that's on the 53 of the practice squad, right? So if a UDFA gets 100K guaranteed and is on the practice squad, that isn't a wasted guarantee. Does that influence who makes the practice squad? That is correct, John. It probably plays a little bit of a factor into it, but if they gave that guarantee, they already have like thoughts of that player, that they like him, and they probably just want him back in the practice squad to see if he can develop nonetheless. More importantly, they don't always have a say, meaning that once you cut them, the player is not required to come back to the Packers practice squad. They could get that 100,000 guarantee from the Green Bay Packers still, unless there's offset language, and we don't have to get into all of that. But maybe they want to go to a different team, and they could still do that. But you are correct in your overall assessment. I'm not sure it plays a huge role in which players that they want to keep, but it certainly, as a tiebreaker, would give the player with the guarantee a little bit more of an advantage for sure. COVID toe. He's going to the Vikings and it's going to hurt us. I would have negotiated really hard with him just to keep him away from the NFC North. I wouldn't have paid him 17, but neither will anyone else. Yeah, but again, if you're Jaire, you have no incentive to work that out with Green Bay. And in fact, you could just say, hey, release us. And if you still want to negotiate with us after that point, we're willing to negotiate with you, but we want to negotiate with all 32 teams. And if the Vikings offer us 16 and you want to come back and offer us 16.5, we'll come back and play for you guys. But we're not just negotiating with one team. We want to negotiate with 31. So there's really no incentive for Jaire to negotiate with just Green Bay in that situation, which is why we probably ultimately got to the place that we're at today. PSA, you can be a real Packer fan and not cheer for Rodgers this year. Sure. I don't know that anyone was saying anything other, Spiked Mocha, but that is the beauty of being a Packer fan. And there are plenty of Packer fans that'll be cheering against him. There'll be plenty of Packer fans that are cheering for him. And I think that's just sort of a natural thing that I would expect for anybody in that almost same exact situation, to be honest. Goody always corrects his draft mistakes. 49ers snaked Puny from us in the 24 draft, and we signed Banks. Noah Williams got snaked by the Chiefs, and we will address cornerback as a priority next season if needed. It's an interesting way to look at it, Mike. I don't know that they're totally correlated, but I do think that this will be a position that they continue to try to upgrade with now that Jaire is gone, whether it's this year, next year, whenever that might happen. I do think it's something that they probably do care about, and they do want to try to get maybe a little bit more depth and competition in here sooner rather than later if they can find a way to do that. Hi, Andy. I'm a big the podcast. I've been watching since 2020, 2021. Thanks so much for the shout out in today's episode. Adam, you are more than welcome. Thank you so much for becoming a member. I appreciate the support. I know I say that, but like just in general, but those things are really, really important, and they mean a ton to the channel and mean a ton to me personally. So I really do appreciate all the support. We are now one injury away from a real problem in our corner room with the talent and wide receiver is just in our division. Why is Goody not attacking it? Again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but just know that zone corner is a little bit different than man corner. It's a little bit different how they go about playing. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but I personally am not I'm not ultra concerned about corner at the moment. I don't feel great about it. I don't feel like corner can be the reason that they are going to win a Super Bowl. It's not going to be the group that gets you there, but I do think it can be good enough to not lose you that, or like make it so that they're the reason that you're not going to it. I think they can be good enough. Don't think they can be the truck, but I think they're good enough to be a solid trailer and one that can ultimately still get you there, if not on their own accord. That's how I would put it right now. But if they can find one more piece to add to that room, I certainly would not be against it. That's for sure. All right. Let me just check here. I got to see if Eversole. Yep, there it is. All right. So I do got to get going here in about 6 minutes or so because I do have to get ready. I will be on The Fan with Marcus Eversole in Green Bay at 2:35 here. So in 11 minutes. And then after that at 3 o'clock today, I will be live on the Bleacher Report app as well. So if you want to talk more about this, I will be live over the course of the next hour or so, both on the radio and then over on Bleacher Report. It is what it is and what it's going to be. Good job, Packers. I certainly, I can understand the frustration, R.R. Smith. I really can. Then at corner, if an injury arises, a nice veteran signing like Gilmore for depth would go a long way. I think the interesting thing about the depth here at corner is the player that you're bringing in is probably not going to be a starter. They're probably going with Bullard, Valentine, Nixon, and Hobbs as their primary four. So bringing in a veteran to say like, hey, come be number 5 is not going to be super enticing to them. Furthermore, you kind of need that number 5 corner to be able to play special teams. It's kind of going to be a very important aspect of their job. So you have to figure out this really weird line of finding a good corner that you could use while also not being a legitimate player from day one, or at least in that starting conversation from day one. So the player might not want to come, plus needing them to be able to play teams. So somebody like Gilmore or Asante Samuel or other ones are not exactly great fits there either. Rasul Douglas. So it's sort of this very fine line to walk. There's not a perfect option out there, but I don't know. I'm sure there's ways to make it happen, but that'll be interesting from Goody's standpoint of what he does. And I could easily see too, where they just give Micah Robinson, Kalen King, and Kamal Haddon that opportunity first and see if anyone steps up and takes that spot and says, I'm going to be corner 4 and I'm going to be corner 5. And if they look great, then you maybe don't need to do anything. And if they don't, then you're probably looking at cut down time or trying to make a trade before the season starts to upgrade that room in some way. Jenkins, it sounds like, is not going to practice this week. He's going to be at minicamp, but not practicing, and he is continuing to look for a better version of his current contract. And I do need to get kind of lightning round here. How do you think the release of Jaire will affect the likelihood of guys like Kalen King, Kamal Haddon, and Micah Robinson making the 53-man roster? It helps them a ton as of right now. If they don't add anyone, you went from maybe one of those guys making the team to now there's a decent chance that all 3 could make it. So it definitely affects it in a major way. If you had to pick one Packers player that would stay in their prime for their full contract, which player would you choose for a 5-year contract? No quarterbacks. I mean, probably McKinney, right? I still think he's going to be, in the prime for his full contract. Yeah, he's a stud all-pro safety. He's a true legitimate all-pro right now. And if I could have 5 more years of all-pro safety on the back end of my defense, that's probably, I think, the one that I would go with there. So I'll say X. Bullard just gets cooked in the slot. Addison made him look like a high school slot. Yeah, I don't think, again, in obvious coverage situations that's who you ultimately want out there. I still expect it to be Hobbs in the slot with Valentine and Nixon on the outsides in obvious passing downs. I do think they're going to use him, wiser this upcoming year. Also remember, that is Javon Bullard as a safety, learning 2 positions as a rookie, going against one of the best wide receivers in the league. I promise you, Javon Bullard has every right to get better as time goes along. I'm not saying he's ever going to be good enough to hang with prime Jordan Addison. I'm not necessarily saying that that's the case, but that's about as tough of an assignment as Javon Bullard could have as a rookie safety, as lining up one-on-one with Jordan Addison in that situation. So I'm not holding that against him too much. I do think in obvious passing situations, you do not want him in the slot. I said that when he got drafted and people are like, he's going to be a slot guy. And I'm like, I think he's a safety and I do not want him in, primary coverage responsibilities and obvious passing downs, but I still think he can get better. And I do think that you have Hobbs in the slot with Nixon and Valentine on the outside and more obvious passing downs this year. What's Ramsey's trade value? Nothing. I mean, if the Packers cut Jaire, the Dolphins probably see the writing on the wall that they're probably going to have to cut Ramsey as well. If it's anything, it's a conditional late round pick. They're in the same situation with Ramsey that the Packers were in with Jaire. Curious if Half wanted Ja gone due to his inability to stay healthy. I'm sure Half had an opinion on it. What that was, I have no idea one way or the other. I don't think it would have been just due to injury situations. If anything, it sounded like Halfley and Jaire had a really good relationship. And I almost, like I said in that what if episode of, if there is a way that Jaire comes back, it might actually be Halfley making a plea for him. But obviously that did not, at least if it did happen, it was not enough to get him back in Green Bay. We will be fine. Last year, only safety that allowed 100 yards was, or you mean corner that allowed 100 yards was Stokes. Has Halfley stated that he'd rather play zone than man more often? No, Halfley has stated that he's going to play the best brand of defense for his football team based on the talent that he has on the roster and based on the group, the team that he's going against. And very clearly, he found a defense that worked incredibly well this past season. And I would expect to see a pretty healthy version of that again this year. Would it be crazy if Zach Tom moves to left tackle next year? I would say yes. Assuming he's a better tackle than Morgan, couldn't that make our O-line better? There's no real difference of left tackle and right tackle in the NFL. You're going against the TJ Watts and some of the best left ends in all of football at right tackle. I don't know why you would ever want to move him to left tackle. The blindside thing is basically done with all the shotgun stuff and quarterbacks scanning the field left to right. It's just, or right to left, whatever. It's not that big of a deal anymore. And if he's playing great at right tackle, why move him at all and risk that he might be less good? Or even if he's the same, right? It doesn't make any sense to do it. And he's certainly not going to be better after playing right tackle for all these years. So I don't think there makes any sense to do it. And I would certainly avoid it if I were Green Bay. Johnny, good to see you. Losing Josh stinks, but we move in next man up. I agree. How did our secondary fare against the Vikings and Lions last year? I'd have to honestly look at it in more detail. I mean, obviously there were issues at times, certainly in the Minnesota one early. But yeah, again, I think that that what we talked about earlier, R.R. Smith, is that in big games against good teams with good receivers, I do still think that there is a need to be better. But I also think that if you improve the pass rush, that will help the secondary quite a bit as well. What's good, Andy? Given the news today, what's the likelihood that we get a standard day before camp announcement that Tom, Wyatt, Walker, or Jenkins have signed an extension? I don't know. That's the question, RJ. I don't have a great feel on it at the moment. If there was one, I would say it's probably Zach Tom, but it's a good question. My guess is Tom and Walker, maybe Wyatt. I would say Tom would be the one. Hobbs outside in base. I think he'll still be in the slot in most nickel situations. Is it possible our secondary can have any player, any position to disguise coverage after the snap, a la the Vikings? In a lot of ways, yes. You don't want to do it too much. You don't want to overcomplicate things, but on any given down, absolutely. 5 to 6 guys that can all play any role in the secondary is fun to see. I do think it is going to have a lot of versatility, which should make it fun. Knew this was going to happen. What cornerback do you think we can look at for the start of the season, just in case we need one? There's nobody that makes a ton of sense at the moment, to be totally honest. Justice and I will talk about that a little bit later today, but I don't think there's a 1A guy that if you look in the market right now that makes a ton of sense, to be honest. Got to open your mind, heart, and soul and let the vibes flow, Andy. Maybe a dark retreat would help. I'm okay. Naman, your comment section of that video was filled with real fan nonsense. Oh, I didn't see that, I guess, but I'm sure that's probably true to some extent. Too bad we lost our cornerback one last year in Preston Smith. That is true. Can bring him back. He's out there. Let's see. Still wild to think that the week 8 matchup will be a game we think about for the rest of the lifetime. Won't fully get the feel of it till it's here. Packers versus Rodgers is going to be a ton of fun. Beast, I'm worried about our cornerback room. Already was, but now even more. We just don't have enough depth. We have good starters, but man, there's just nothing out there in free agency or trade. Trade, we don't know. Maybe they can find something, but free agency is a little bit tough right now. I think we signed Gilmore and he raises the knowledge and play of the youngsters would be a good value signing. Not against it. I don't think he adds that much at the moment, to be honest, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he could be a little bit better than I'm expecting. No, it's basically the same corner room as last year plus Hobbs. Our defense was good last year. Yeah, but our secondary got shredded multiple times going against good quarterbacks and wide receivers. But the pass rush also wasn't as good. Hopefully the pass rush can be better this year, but that's going to be a key part of it. Andy, is it time to wonder if the Packers have issues with veterans? How many players is this now, or is it normal? Seems like a lot of guys sounding off the last 5 to 6 years. I think their contract structure needs some looking at, because I almost think that it becomes conducive to some of this stuff. So I do think there's something there, Dan. I need to vet it out a little bit more, to be honest. All right. Yeah, I'd love to see Preston out there again in the cornerback position. You guys are amazing. All right, guys, I do need to get out of here. Going live right now on the Marcus Eversole, Better Call Eversole on 107.5 The Fan if you want to check that out. I will see you guys all very soon. Thank you so much for being here. Members, you're the absolute best. Thank you for everyone else. 428 people in chat right now. Appreciate you guys a ton. I'll see you all very soon. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.